Prime Minister Modi is in South Africa's Johannesburg. He will be participating in the first ever G20 summit hosted on African soil. He will be in South Africa for three days, and he's received a warm welcome there from the members of the Indian diaspora as well as he arrived at Johannesburg. Indian diaspora had welcomed the Prime Minister with Ganpati Prarthana, and right now he's meeting with some leaders as well. The Prime Minister had also expressed the cultural connect between India and South Africa and said that the relations between both nations is heartwarming and timeless. Now, on the sidelines of the summit, the Prime Minister is going to be holding bilateral meetings with several world leaders. Prime Minister Modi said that he's looking forward to productive talks with the world leaders on key global issues. During the G20 summit, the Prime Minister is also expected to address all three main sessions, which will focus on inclusive economic growth, global climate challenges, and the rapidly evolving field of artificial intelligence, including its opportunities as well as its risks. Prime Minister Modi is in South Africa for the next 3 days. He is in Johannesburg for the G20 summit. And he's going to be meeting with several leaders as well on the sidelines of the summit. My colleague Aditya Rajkol joins us with more details. Aditya, Prime Minister Modi is in South Africa. He's discussed investments, digital ecosystem with several of the leaders. There are more bilaterals planned as well.
Well, yes, these are visuals coming on the screen from the venue of the G20 in Johannesburg in South Africa, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi has just entered. And this is the important inaugural session of the G20 that will be beginning within 30 minutes. And there you have it, Prime Minister Narendra Modi actually coming to the venue at Nasrec, which is the exact place where the G20 in South Africa will be held. In a few minutes from now, we'll have the inaugural session, but also the family photo, which is a tradition of the G20. Yesterday, Prime Minister Modi had arrived in Johannesburg to a rousing welcome by the Indian diaspora. A lot of music, a lot of fanfare, a lot of selfies being taken by the Indian diaspora. Also, the local community very excited to welcome in thousands coming to welcome him. And now the South African, hosts are now welcoming Prime Minister Modi at the venue of the G20. You can see Cyril Ramaphosa, in fact, welcoming the Prime Minister and, in fact, greeting the big handshake taking place at the G20. As I said, in a few minutes from now, we will have the inaugural session and the family photo, and then officially the G20 summit would be beginning. Of course, there's been a lot of controversy in this G20 on the hosts itself, but staying with these images of Prime Minister being welcomed at the G20, it's been roughly about 24 hours for the Prime Minister in South Africa. But at this particular stage, the big talking point has been the Russia-Ukraine war and also the absence of the United States from the G20. Remember, Donald Trump had said that he would boycott the G20 and nobody senior enough from the Trump administration would be attending. So only the ambassador and few diplomats will be attending, and that too, only the handing over ceremony that will be taking place at the end of the G20, because from South Africa, the G20 now goes to Florida in United States. And these are visuals of Prime Minister Narendra Modi attending the G20. Prime Minister in his departure statement had said that India would be focusing on the theme of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Remember, in 2023 as well, where India hosted the G20 at the Bharat Mandapam in the national capital, which was a huge, massive success, a lot of color, a lot of fanfare. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam was the entire theme. One family and one planet is the theme that continues to resonate here in India. So India playing the right kind of cards for diplomacy. The first kind of bilateral that happened yesterday was with Anthony Albanese, the Australian Prime Minister, who had met the Prime Minister Modi. And now a lot of other bilaterals could happen soon, perhaps later today and tomorrow as well. And let's not forget, apart from the G20, we will have the IPSA meeting also between India, South Africa and Brazil. And the big attention would be on the leaders' statement, the declaration from the G20, whether there is a signed declaration that really comes out, because US is not interested, and US is trying to influence other G20 members also to not sign the declaration in South Africa. So clearly, at this moment, a lot of controversy, a geopolitical shift that we are witnessing at the G20 level. Also, a lot of top leaders from US, from China, and from Russia also missing out. But Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, there you have it, is in attendance, the big handshake taking place. And in a few minutes from now, we will have the inaugural session of the G20 Leaders Summit 2025.
Aditya, stay on with us. I'm also being joined by Godfrey Mutisba, joining us, senior journalist. Thank you for joining us, Mutisba. Firstly, if you could take us through the tempo there at Johannesburg as far as the leaders, they've all arrived and Prime Minister as well has been welcomed there, and the summit, of course, going to be starting shortly.
Indeed. So what we're seeing, obviously, are the leaders coming in and to the official opening ceremony of the summit. I can tell you that on the ground, the atmosphere is absolutely vibrant. Obviously, soured in part at the beginning by the absence of the U.S. president, plus his extremely hostile rhetoric against South Africa. But the message that's been coming broadly from all the leaders that we've seen arriving, those that have given speeches, is support for South Africa and support for South Africa's broad goals, reminding you those goals are solidarity, inequality, as well as sustainability. And yesterday, in the past 2 days, actually, we have had the meeting of the leaders, the business leaders. And again, the unanimity there has been absolutely unmistakable. So while the political noise has been going on between the US and South Africa in particular, it has to be said, what we are seeing from the business side is a unity of purpose, I think, that has been really, really interesting to watch. They issued their communique yesterday in which they absolutely appear to all agree on what needs to be done, shying away from the politics. But the politics, of course, is inserting itself here. And I heard a few minutes ago that apparently President Donald Trump has called a meeting of European leaders to talk about his Ukraine plan. So he is pulling them out of the G20 summit to talk to them about Ukraine, in part sort of inserting himself into the conversation without obviously participating. But so it's all happening here, and we are following the conversations. We wait very shortly for the official start of our proceedings here.
Absolutely, Mr. Mutisba. Now, like you said, the issue of Russia-Ukraine is going to be taking focal point when it comes to G20 discussions. But what else is on the agenda? We're expecting that climate action is also going to be discussed. Not just that, but all of the countries do want to work on poor countries as well, countries that are developing and are facing issues. So the developed countries would be liking to help those countries that are still facing several of these issues that are going to be brought on the global front.
Yeah, certainly what we've also heard is that there's unanimity between the leaders, and perhaps it might be more less difficult, let me put it that way, for the leaders to reach consensus because of the absence of President Donald Trump. Amongst the leaders that are attending, as I said at the beginning, there's clearly support for South Africa's positions. One issue that is going to be tackled, and we know the report is going to be presented later on this morning, is inequality. There was a report that was produced by Professor Joseph Stiglitz that's going to be tabled for the leaders to consider, and it speaks broadly about the huge inequalities that we're seeing in the world. One statistic that stood out for me is that in Africa, you've got 4 billionaires, and out of those 4 billionaires, you have a huge amount of wealth versus the next 750 million people. So the amount of wealth that they own equals the amount of wealth owned by the next 750 million people. Absolutely staggering. That report is going to be tabled at the leaders' meeting, and we shall, of course, hear whether that's going to be included in the final declaration that's going to be coming out of this meeting, or indeed a declaration does come out, because there's division as to whether there's going to be that declaration at all because of the U.S. position. The U.S. position has sent a delegation. South Africa has said that delegation is too junior. It should not be sitting at the table with the heads of state. But we don't know what the final position is going to be when they do sit in that room to deliberate on that final report.
Right, Mr. Mutisba, stay on with us. My colleague Aditya Raj Kaul is with us as well. Aditya, you were mentioning earlier as well the Prime Minister's meeting with the Australian counterpart and the discussions that had happened there on the sidelines of the G20 as well. And what are we expecting that he would be talking about with the other leaders he's expected to meet on the sidelines?
Well, as I said, the India-Australia bilateral was to kick off this, visit in South Africa that happened yesterday. PM landing in Johannesburg to a rousing welcome. And now the G20 formally beginning with the Prime Minister Modi also arriving there. In a few minutes, we'll have the visuals of the opening ceremony, the family photo, etc. India would be certainly pushing for a South-South cooperation. India has been in the past pushing for a global South leadership, and India has emerged as a leader of the global South. In fact, in the 2023 summit, the inclusion of South Africa, and of course, a lot of efforts that India has put in getting in the countries of the global South and their voice resonate at the G20 platform as well. Apart from that, we'll have, of course, the push for artificial intelligence, equal access, the issue of the digital public infrastructure, and of course, the climate action and climate changes that are happening, and how the climate change needs to be fought, and how there can be a consensus developed on that. So India has played a significant role at the level of the United Nations. So at the level of the G20 also, India will try to build on this consensus and see what can be taken forward from here. So we'll keep
Right.
our viewers updated on the latest on this on NDTV, even as the G20 begins shortly in Johannesburg.
Stay on with us, Aditya. Let me bring in Mr. Mutisba, still with us. Now, Mr. Mutisba, something that's very important for India on the global stage at this very moment is counter-terrorism. And that's going to play an important role in the conversation we build on in the forum as well.
Certainly, I'd imagine that's going to be brought up given what we've also seen on the African continent. I mean, we've got a number of conflicts that are raging here. If you look at the Sahel, and then you look at what's happening in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, though we haven't had it from official government sources in terms of South Africa's involvement and a desire to include it, but we'll certainly watch and look out for it.
Absolutely, Mr. Mutisba. Thank you for joining us and sharing your thoughts and bringing us those updates as well from Johannesburg. My colleague Aditya is still with us. Aditya, now we're expecting shortly the family photo, like you said. What else are we looking forward to when it comes to key discussions on the platform? Like Mr. Mutisba said, there are several key ideologies that we are going to be discussing, including climate playing a major role, and for India when it comes to global counter-terrorism operations as well.
Well, that's right. Officially, the G20 is beginning in Johannesburg, South Africa, amidst all the controversies and the rhetoric. As my senior journalist from South Africa also pointed out, Trump has been on a rampage completely against South Africa. In a very bad taste, a poor taste. But as you pointed out in the last question, counterterrorism has been one of the pinnacles where India has played a significant role globally, and India would be pushing for a consensus on condemning terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. There cannot be a differentiation between good terror and bad terror. If you remember, just a few days ago at the SCO Heads of Governments meeting in Moscow, Russia, External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar also spoke against terrorism and said this was time for the global community to unite. And this comes at a time when India has just faced a massive terror attack, that too in the heart of the national capital, the Delhi suicide bombing outside the Red Fort, in which 15 people were killed and more than 30 injured. In the last 6 months, it's the second major terror attack apart from the Pahalgam terror attack, completely sponsored by Pakistan. And that led to a mini war, a 4-day war between India and Pakistan as well. The ceasefire, again, a diplomatic slugfest between DC and New Delhi. And amidst that, in the backdrop of that, this G20 is taking shape. There have been a lot of speculations whether Prime Minister Modi will be meeting Trump. It did not happen on the sidelines of the ASEAN because India did not go, Indian Prime Minister did not go. It will not be happening at the G20 because Trump is not going to G20. So we'll have to wait when that trade deal really happens between India and US, and when that big handshake really happens between Modi and Trump. But staying with the G20, of course, it's a major platform over the years that has come for a global consensus of several issues. In the 2023 G20 that India hosted, that was a historic consensus on the Russia-Ukraine issue. But the big question right now is, in a deeply divided world where Trump is trying to bring in economic measures that are not going with several countries, of course, tariffs that have been imposed against India as well. So the question really is that will there be a consensus? Because top leaders from US, Russia, and of course, China are not attending the G20. So does this make it a symbolic event? Does this mean that the main gravitas of this meeting will not be successful? Only time will tell. So we'll have to wait for the leaders' declaration and the deliberations that happen through the day today at the G20 to see what conclusion really is, whether this is some kind of a consensus or a message that comes out from the G20 in Johannesburg.
Right, Aditya, another important aspect of India's relations with South Africa as well has been digital cooperation. Prime Minister had met with the chairman of Naspers as well, which is going to be a boost to Indian digital ecosystems. If you could take us through that meeting and what came out of it.
Well, yes, whenever Prime Minister goes abroad, especially in global multilateral forums, the focus has been to also meet on the sidelines global CEOs, people involved in digital public infrastructure, disruptions like the artificial intelligence and several other such aspects that are key to the growth story, not just of India, but the global community as well. There are several changes that are happening. There are technological disruptions that are happening, and India cannot be far behind in that. There are several Indian researchers, scientists, experts in artificial intelligence who are making a great stride, not just in India, but in the Western countries, including the US, UK, and across the Europe as well. And that's why, in this particular case, he's been meeting the CEOs to see, what can be incorporated in the government policies and schemes, and what kind of initiatives can be taken by the government as well. And that's what Prime Minister has been keen about, and what he has been doing is having individual conversations with such global icons and CEOs and leaders in this space. So digital economy and of course the digital public infrastructure, the artificial intelligence has been a game changer over the last few months and years, and that's what will pave the way forward. Even though there is a huge kind of a cold war on the artificial intelligence, etc., technology between the US and the Chinese. But at this particular stage, India can play a significant role amidst a massive trade war and the tariff war that is escalating over the last many months. So, at this particular juncture, on the sidelines of the G20, the focus of the Prime Minister to also speak about India's strategic autonomy, to actually focus on India's plus points, the huge workforce that we have. We have a huge capacity building exercise as well, and how India and South Africa also can come together in this regard. As I said, Global South is another major factor in which India has emerged as a leader of the Global South and can play a significant role in putting the voice of the Global South all across. For years together, the voice of the Global South has been ignored, particularly in the West, and this is the time when India is leading the Global South and of course is recognized as the leader of the Global South and can take the voices, the concerns, and the agenda of the Global South at the highest level. And that's why Prime Minister Modi has been recognized by many of these countries from the Global South. In fact, we've seen the rousing welcome that Prime Minister received yesterday in South Africa, speaking about the kind of respect and love that he shares with this particular country. So we will certainly see, more developments through the day. I'm being told that Prime Minister will be speaking in all the three sessions of the G20, and thereafter will be the leaders' statement, and finally tomorrow will be the IPSA meeting as well. So, and finally the bilaterals also. So a packed schedule for the next 2 days for the Prime Minister. Indian diplomacy really making a big power push at the G20 in Johannesburg.
Absolutely, Aditya. And adding to what you just said, the Prime Minister also said he's going to be reiterating the Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam motto that the Prime Minister has been placing on all foreign platforms where he's spoken. And this also plays into, Aditya, the G20 summit's theme this time, which is solidarity, equality and sustainability. Again, carrying forward the messaging of ensuring equality in terms of accessibility to resources for other developing economies.
That's right. In fact, India's foreign policy, the backbone of India's foreign policy has been Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. That world is one family. This comes from our roots, this comes from our civilization, and that's what the Indian foreign policy has incorporated. In fact, over the last many, many years, it's been more than 11 years that Prime Minister Modi has been the Prime Minister. But over the years, we've seen this being reflected increasingly in India's foreign policy goals and the kind of conversations and diplomacy and dialogue that we have with several countries. In fact, during the pandemic, during COVID, how India helped more than 100 countries receive, the vaccines was one of the biggest examples, perhaps in the last century, of huge emergency situations across the globe when entire West, including the US and several European countries, have shut their doors. It was India that was helping the global South, not just the global South. Whoever had asked for help, whoever needed help, was helped by India, and that was the biggest example of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. After that as well, whenever there is a question of a disaster, happening, and the disaster relief that needs to be sent out or rescue work needs to be done, India has been at the forefront, from Turkey to, in fact, Afghanistan, and of course several other countries. Recently, we've seen events that have happened in Afghanistan, and India has been at the forefront of helping out, not just through medicines and relief and food, but sending in personnel as well whenever required. So. Of course, India has been at the forefront of this diplomacy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, and on the economic side as well, India has been urging the global community to unite in this deeply divided world. In fact, on the question of the two wars that have been happening over the last 3 years, the Russia-Ukraine war that continues for almost 4 years now. In a few months, it will be 4 years. And of course, the ceasefire that we have achieved between Israel and Hamas. In both these situations, Prime Minister Modi and India have said that this is not a time of war. This is not an era of war. Solutions cannot be found in the battlefield. And certainly, there needs to be dialogue and diplomacy that needs to be given. So these visuals of Prime Minister coming at the G20, giving G20 an opportunity for reflection, for dialogue and debate, and for consensus as well, is very, very significant at a time when South Africa has faced a lot of wrath from US President Donald Trump. In fact, India isn't far behind on the ceasefire question. Trump has been trying to convince the global community that US had a role to play, which is not right. The reality is that Pakistan had begged for a ceasefire and US did not have a role to play. But as of now, staying with the G20 focus, which is from planet solidarity to fighting the climate change, and of course, bringing in equality and
Right.
equal access to each and every person. And India will be focusing on that. India will be pushing for the agenda of the global South as its leader.